We were FaceTiming with Chris and Tracy yesterday as we were on our way to celebrate our daughter's birthday. And I kind of tongue in cheek said, "Ha, we get to be at a family event and somebody else is not there." Doesn't usually happen. So I think the first thing I need to say is just thank you. Thank you to all of you. Just seeing you praying here this morning, and I know that you guys have been praying for us. And we have been at a very vulnerable and sometimes scary and just weak point in our lives and in our ministry. And so thank you for praying for us and for caring for us. If there's one thing about Briarwood that I'm always amazed, the people here, when there's a need, they're ready to give. Money is usually flowing to help people, and prayer, they're ready to pray and ask God to intervene. So thank you for doing that. Feel free to ask questions throughout. I'm never that entertained by somebody just talking for a long time. So just yell or raise your hand if there's anything you're just curious about. Be happy to answer. We can make it as interactive as possible. I'm sure some of you want to hear different things. Some of you are more interested kind of in the geopolitical, kind of what's happening, where is it currently, what happened at what points during this whole story. So I'll try to include some of that. Some of you, I'm sure, are curious to know, how has God and his kingdom gone forth in a unique way during this particular moment? And some of you are like, I just want to see Anna and hear about the kids. So there will be a little bit of all of that, actually. So I'll make sure that it's not just me blathering on the whole time. So 122 days ago, we woke up and we went through our normal routine. We always wake up before the kids wake up, try to get our minds around what's about to happen when they wake up. And we spend some time in prayer. We spend some time reading the Bible. So we were sitting down. I was in my chair. Anna was on the couch, and I had my Bible open, and Anna decided to check her phone. And she just looked up and she said, "Russia has invaded." And we knew that moment, like our lives and the life of Ukraine was never going to be the same. I don't think we could comprehend what it was going to mean. I'm not sure if anybody could, but we knew that life was about to be different. We, just by way of reminder, for those of you who may not be as familiar or know where we serve. So this is Ukraine, and I'll come back to this map later. But we serve over in Western Ukraine, in Lviv. I don't know why this says Lvov. That's actually the Russian version. So ignore that. It's Lviv. Lviv in Western Ukraine, very close to Poland. We're part of a church planting team. We've been there for 9 years now. We have been leading the college ministry. I'm an RUF Global pastor. And so for 9 years, we've been pouring our lives into these people, into this church, into this college ministry. And really, we can say, I think, by God's grace, the church has grown, the college ministry has grown, people have come to faith, there's leaders being raised up, and we've been seeing God at work over 9 years. It hasn't just been kind of an empty, fruitless 9 years of ministry. We've seen God working. And for those of you who may not know who everybody in our family is, if you weren't sure. So me, Anna, our oldest Lucy, then Finn, Evie, and Jane, who just had her birthday. So Jane's 2. She just had her birthday on Friday. Lucy is 7. Finn is 5. Evie is 4, and then Jane is 2. Do you want me to say how old you are too? No, okay. Like I said, we've been pouring for 9 years. We've been pouring our lives into this church, into this people, into this city. And so we knew, I think a lot of people asked us, like, what are you doing still there? Why are you still in Ukraine? Why are you still even in Poland? You can imagine, we spent 9 years, our home is there, our lives are there. So when the war started, it wasn't just an easy, like, oh, it's time for us to go, we're going to leave. We had friends there, we have a home. And so our team had been planning together and thinking, and honestly, to be totally honest, we did not think this was going to happen. Even when the State Department pulled out its people from the embassy. This was not the first time that Russia had been building up on the border. And I think maybe it was a defense mechanism, but we really honestly thought maybe 50-50, but we really don't think this is actually going to happen. Not in the way that it has. And so, but we prepared as though it might. And so our team, being in Western Ukraine, we knew that we were going to be the place to which everybody fled. Russia wasn't going to invade Lviv right away. This was going to be from the east, from the north maybe. And so we knew that the Ukrainians in Eastern Ukraine were going to come to Lviv first. And so we got to work a week or two beforehand. We set up a shelter. We totally cleaned out our office, our student center, and just set out beds. This is one of the rooms. There's like 6 rooms in the office. And so we just set out beds. It has a kitchen. So we knew that we were going to need a place for people to land to make their decision. Are we staying here? Are we going to go onward into Europe? And we knew that they were going to be coming with very little. So we tried to stock up on food, on hygiene items. There's really too many stories. I'm thinking already of like 5 or 10 stories of things that happened, you know. So Anna eventually was, you know, letting one of the girls who came was just wearing her sweatshirts and all of her, because she came with just a backpack, you know, with a couple outfits. And so we knew that in Lviv we were going to have time. We knew that it wasn't going to be invasion. We're out of luck. We're suddenly in Russian occupied territory. And so we wanted to be ready to receive people and then to respond as things were changing. Kind of looking at the war a little bit, it became clear pretty quickly that Russia had 2 main goals: capture as much territory as possible from the east and try to capture Kyiv so that they can install a new government. So those first few days were pretty intense and kind of scary because you weren't sure what was going to happen with Kyiv. And we knew that if Kyiv was captured, if Zelensky was either killed or captured, and suddenly Russia has control of Kyiv, that Lviv was going to eventually and probably pretty soon become a hotspot, because Lviv, for those of you who may not know, is sort of the cradle of Ukrainian national identity. It was always, during the whole Soviet Union, it was a thorn in their side. There was always, for years, guerrilla warfare and people fighting back against the Soviet army and the Soviet rule. And so we knew that if Russia gained control of the capital and started trying to implement their desires in the whole country, Lviv eventually would be a dangerous spot to be. So we were kind of waiting, watching, trying to care for the people coming in, but also realizing we may need to evacuate at any moment. So the first few days were intense. And I think it wasn't until we ended up in Poland that we realized how much it had been weighing on us. I think about 2 or 3 days into being in Poland, Anna said, "My chest doesn't hurt anymore." She didn't even realize, like, oh my goodness, this is just so heavily weighing on us. And we realized, you know, this is intense, obviously. And I heard stories later. I think that was kind of true for everybody, Ukrainians and foreigners. You've never lived through this. How do you prepare to live through the fact that you're suddenly in a country at war? And how do you respond to it? But it was very intense. So you're also trying to care for others, but you're also trying to care for yourself, and you're trying to be aware of everything all at once. So as people started coming from the east, I'll tell you the story of one couple that we know, and sort of the way that God used this. Vasya and Vika, some of you may have watched, our team leader does an update every Sunday. Some of you may have seen that. And he did an interview with a couple whose names are Vasya and Vika. And they're from Kharkiv, which is right here. Kharkiv has still not been taken. Praise the Lord. It's been under attack pretty much the entirety of the war, but never was taken. But They woke not to checking their phones, but to the sounds of explosions. And so they knew they had a backpack ready. They each had a backpack, and they owned their apartment in Kharkiv. So they heard explosions at about 5 a.m. They woke up and they immediately, they had a plan. The church had a plan. And so they got in their car, which they had just bought 2 weeks earlier, knowing that we might have to drive away and leave. So they got in their car and met at the meeting point where I think they had 6 people in their 5-seater car, and they drove for 36 hours without sleep, just straight across the country, traffic jams all the way. And kind of the further west you go, the more people are gathering together to try to escape. And so what usually is a 14-hour drive ended up being 36 hours. And exhausted and beat, they come to Lviv and they stop and they come to, I remember seeing all the people from Kharkiv at church that morning, and we're just thinking, we don't know what to do, because they're just hugging and weeping. And I mean, they don't know. Did I just lose my home? Is it gone forever? Is my stuff gone forever? Is our church building going to be standing? Is our city going to be standing? And I think I began to realize that it feels a lot like, I hope none of you have ever experienced like a house break-in, but it felt very similar, like thinking about your city, like a monument being bombed. It feels very violating, like somebody has taken something that belonged to you, entered a space that was your home. And so they're dealing with that. Vika, this is the second time she's been forced out of her home by the Russian army. She's from Crimea. And so in 2014, she fled, went to Kharkiv, set up life there. Now she had to flee again. So we're joking, maybe you shouldn't be in Lviv. We don't really want you to have to flee again in our home to be attacked. So the interesting thing is they've been working with SSK, which is the equivalent of InterVarsity in Ukraine. And they've been working with InterVarsity for almost a decade, I think. And they've really had a passion to plant a church, a Presbyterian church in Ukraine. And so we've been in conversation with them for a couple of years about whether they might want to come to Lviv to get some training and then maybe plant, because our church planting team dreams of planting other churches throughout Western Ukraine. And so they've thought, maybe not, we're not sure, maybe we will, but they're finding it hard to leave InterVarsity and also hard to leave his brother as the pastor of the church where they are. And so it's hard for them to think about leaving their family and church, etc. So not the way we would have wanted it to happen, but they're forced from their homes in Kharkiv. He just finished seminary, and now they're in Lviv as our first pastoral church planting interns. And they've decided to stay in Lviv for the next 2 to 3 years to think about planting a church when the war is over. What will the rebuilding process look like? And so now, where they were having trouble deciding, God made the decision for them and brought them to a place where they can be trained and now go out and be future pastors and leaders in our church. So a few days after the invasion began, 5 days specifically, we decided, for various reasons, not necessarily just because we felt unsafe, we decided that we were going to leave and go to Poland with some of our other team members. This is us. I think this is at the border, or at least getting close to the border. We drove all the way down to Romania. So as you might imagine, a lot of people were trying to evacuate. And so people were waiting at these 2 borders for 48 hours sometimes, just sitting at the border. So we decided, instead of just going the 30 minutes west and crossing, so we actually drove down into Romania and then into Hungary, Slovakia, and back up into Poland. The border was a really, one of the saddest places, because men 18 to 65 years old cannot leave. And so it's just men leaving their wives and children, saying goodbye. And again, it's that we don't know if we're going to see each other again. I think we felt that particularly poignantly the morning we decided to go. 2 of our friends, younger people who are friends of ours, came. And I mean, it was just weeping in our yard, and we don't know. You keep hearing this, right? We don't know. That's kind of the repeat, what's been on repeat is we don't know what tomorrow is. We don't know what next week is going to be. And so we're leaving these two friends not knowing if we're going to see them again. And our kids are leaving their bunk beds and their toys and not knowing, are they going to see them again? We're leaving our kitchen, our couches, are we going to come back to these things that are just things, but like we built a home here. So we went with a convoy of 5 other cars, and we drove some Ukrainian families, some missionary families, and we drove into Romania, stayed overnight, drove into Slovakia, stayed overnight, drove up into Poland, and finally came to Krakow, where we have a daughter church. And so our plan was to try to figure out a way. Well, first it was just survival, let's land, let's get our bearings, and then try to form a plan for how we can continue to care for our churches, our people, especially those further east. It kind of became clear as the days passed that, praise God for his support of the Ukrainian army. They held strong in the east, ended up holding strong around Kyiv, and it became clear that this wasn't just going to wipe through the whole country, that it was starting to get stuck in the eastern Ukraine. And so that was when we started forming plans of, okay, how can we re-engage with Western Ukraine? And we parked in Poland. And I kind of want to let Anna come up and tell you a little bit more about her experience with the kids in Poland and what that ended up looking like and what they ended up doing, what our team ended up doing as well.
I hope I'm tall enough. I think I am. Yes. So as Kirkus said, we eventually made it.
Tom, would you mind just turning the volume up a little bit?
Oh, sorry. I woke up with a frog in my throat this morning, so I apologize if I get croaky.
Far left.
We good? Is it better? I can get closer. So we traveled with the 4 kids and other children. We were not the only family with kids. I think there were probably 7 or 8. No, it would have been like 9 or 10 total. Some moms that just had to say goodbye to their husbands. And I think we traveled with 2 men, like it was 2, like a bunch of women, 2 men and a bunch of kids. So we found there is a hotel. I mean, literally it's like, as we're going, I've never traveled like this. I like to plan. It's like, you're literally like, now where are we going? But you're trying to hold it together for the kids at the same time and not freak them out. Literally when we were leaving Lviv, we always draw a map for our children because we tend to travel long distances. Like we're going to do this first, then this, then this. And our map we would get to the border and then it had 3 arrows. It was like, we don't know if we're going to Hungary. We don't know if we're going to Poland, and we don't know if we're going to Slovakia. And our oldest daughter was like, what? It was very different way we traveled, but we made it to Poland. And there, I think we had to answer 3 questions to begin with. If we were going to stay, where can we live? Is there going to be a community? And then what are we going to do with our kids? As y'all know, I mean, tons of Ukrainians are pouring into Poland, specifically Poland, because it's very welcoming, because the Polish language is a little similar to Ukrainian. Ukrainians can get by in Polish. I was even able to understand some, which I was amazed by. But the housing all of a sudden is just gone. I mean, we were looking at different places and that morning it's gone. You look for something else. Okay, it's gone. But God provided an Airbnb for us with 3 rooms. It was very small, but we did it. Our son only broke a few things. But so we had a place to live. The other part was community. We had traveled with our team and just a few other family units, parts of family. But then all of a sudden it's like, how are we going to be here? And so the church played a role, and then people just started coming. And so by the end of the time when we were leaving, it was probably 30 people had come and joined this team of Mod Podge, kind of all put together. Also, so people for our children, we had my sister come over, my sister-in-law come over. We also had 2 teachers who volunteered So our daughter Lucy's in first grade, so she still needs to do school. These teachers volunteered just to come, and I just wept when they said they would come. I'll cry right now. Yeah, because as you can imagine, I'm sure there's many moms where you're thinking, how are we going to survive with our kids in an apartment in a place that we don't know? And they were just like, we'll come, we'll take all of them. And when they said they would take all 4, I was just like, whoa, like, thank you. Just because I could feel God just slowly putting it together. When we've never done, we like safety, we like to plan things that we're about to go into, and there was no plans, and God had them before we got there. So as the team is forming, there were 3 things that the team started to fill. It was the shelter. So people who were coming in, we were catching them as best as we could catch them. That was the shelter. And then the help center kind of came along after a few weeks. This is the help center. Yes. It was an old bank that we rented, and we just turned it into a kind of a community space. So they had Wednesday nights, we had gatherings for the other Ukrainian children. Now, eventually we were doing English classes, there are Polish classes now. What else? There was Bible studies now. They were starting an art therapy group for women in particular, because really there's only women coming. So this was beautiful chaos. Occasionally you would come in, and I think I was like, there's no order, but you could see order being formed. It gave a space for these moms to come who were exhausted, and have their kids be safe. They can be rough and tumbly with each other. There were toys. So I know it was just a huge gift for them. It was a gift for us. I mean, we were kind of in the same boat. We, as Americans, we had more resources. We had more options. But I could relate to these women as Kirk was going back and forth. I think you went back and forth 6 or 7 times. I can't remember, maybe 8. Just being alone with your kids in a foreign country. Like, what do you do with that? And so they started to become friends. There was one woman in particular. She was from the Dnipro region, which is close to Kyiv, further east. She had left her husband, but not left her husband. Her husband was there. And she had a 5-year-old son, Andrei. And she's not a believer, but she just happened to see a sign in the church that they're helping Ukrainians. So she showed up one morning, and I talked with her, and I was like, we have a group on Wednesday. And she's been coming faithfully, and I think she's coming to the Bible study now. And it's not because she wanted God or she wanted to come to church, but she needed people, and she needed other people that knew what she was going through. It reminded me of why so many people come to Christ, is they need something. They don't know they need God, but they need food, they need shelter, they need people, they need a relationship. And so this was filling that need for her. I'm trying to think of what else. Our kids themselves, they did well. The first few weeks were rough. The 3 youngest I don't think were aware very much of what was going on, but Lucy she was more aware. And another missionary family came. I can say this. They were from Russia, and they were out of the country, but they were helping with the team, and they had 4 kids that were our kids' ages, like And so it was just very strange to me that like our families represented these 2 conflicting countries kind of in general mission together. And one day I heard Lucy and Ellie, both 7, discussing Russia and Ukraine, just geopolitical, like on a 7-year-old level. And Lucy was saying like, yes, Ukraine should win. And Ellie was saying, yes, I love the old Russia. And just her perception, she's having to struggle as a 7-year-old, that her home is the aggressor. And what do you do with that? And but I know, so that's kind of our family. And then this is still functioning. And you can talk for Crates for Ukraine. I'm sure that will come up.
Remind me, what time do we have until officially? I want to. 10:30. Oh, goodness. I know, but there's still, okay. So I'm gonna have to skip some stuff, but I'll say that, well, that's Vasi and Vika, by the way. I forgot to show you the picture. So the couple that's now with us in the Lviv. Not sure what I'm doing in that picture. Like Anna said, we set up a team there in Krakow, and the goal was then to be a bridge between Lviv and Krakow. And so we were helping people out, and ask, if you want to, I'll let you ask questions of some of the stories of the people that we brought out, both believers, non-believers, and the things that they saw and were dealing with, the trauma that they went through. But we were also trying to be a bridge back in, and so bringing aid back in. Some of you may have heard about our RUF intern, Ukrainian, whose name is Ruslan. He is probably a future pastor in the church in Ukraine. It's interesting and funny in a sort of dark humor kind of way to see the way that God works. As soon as the war started, he wanted to fight. He said, I want to go right now. And he kept saying, he told me, I don't know how many times, I know how to shoot. I would be useful. And he kept saying he wanted to go to the front. This is him right here. What you'll notice is he has a broken foot. So he couldn't go fight. As much as he wanted to, God had him pretty much laid up in his apartment for the first 2 weeks of the war. Because of that, Ruslan, who's ultra capable in a lot of things, he grew up without a father, so he was the man of the house from the time he was 7 probably. So he's a handyman. He knows how to plant and be a farmer of sorts, and so he's ultra capable, always looking for something to do. So because he's stuck in Lviv and unable to join the army, he became the head of our aid operation. And so because of him being stuck in Lviv, he has probably received, not probably, he's received millions of dollars worth of aid, organized it, partnered with Vika, who I mentioned earlier, to figure out where are the best places in the east that it needs to go, put it onto vans, trucks, given to our pastors, who then drove them onto the front lines to give to people who stayed, and elderly especially, who stayed in the cities and didn't have anywhere to go, couldn't go. And so because Ruslan's foot is broken, instead of fighting, he's literally saving lives of people who are in occupied territory, who are on the front. And who knows what God's plan is for him going forward, but God probably kept him alive, a future pastor in one of our churches, maybe a future church plant as well. Very much against his will. He did not want to. Okay. There's more to say, but I want to leave time for you guys to ask questions if you'd like as well. So much more to say. I don't know. Do you guys have any? I want to answer maybe things that you've been wondering about, or whether it's more about our family or about ministry in the churches or about. Yeah, please.
Kirk, sorry, just a political question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Fox News, it's like watch all the time. But do you have any inside news for us on what's going on the bank front on the east? I mean, in south near Odessa and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is it good news or bad news? Because all I know is Fox. So.
Yeah, it depends on how you interpret it, probably. For weeks, they've been fighting over one town called Severodonetsk, and the Ukrainian army just pulled out of that town. But I don't think, I've heard for weeks now also that they never thought they would be able to hold it at the time being. They were always intending, but it was drawing resources, Russian resources, to have to pour more into that one place so that they couldn't attack in other fronts. It's really hard to say where this is going. And to be honest, it depends a lot on us. It depends on Western weapons and funding. And if that dries up, then Ukraine will lose. But yeah, I mean, Russia has had to focus it's clear, they're not saying this, but it's clear they lost their first objectives, which were to take Kyiv and install a new government. And so now they're just kind of rearranging where the target is and saying, look, we hit the target, which, now I guess is taking the Donbass region and parts of southern Ukraine. They've started, it seems like Russia has started installing, like setting things up to annex parts of those territory, to officially bring them under Russian control, which means that whenever there is a counterattack by Ukraine, it's going to mean more destruction and more difficulty. Probably the next target is another small town right next to Severodonetsk, Lysychansk. And so if they get that, they'll have basically all of these two regions, oblasts. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything because the Ukrainian counteroffensive hasn't really started in earnest yet. So it just depends on, it's hard to say what will happen, but Ukraine's kind of getting ready for a big push.
Is military service compulsory in the country where most of these men that are staying are already trained, or do they have to train them?
They have to train them, yeah. Sadly, most of the ones who would be called up would not be ready immediately to fight. The draft has been in effect since 2014. So that's a conversation that I've had with a lot of my young students. As soon as they graduate, they're eligible to be drafted. And so a lot of ethical questions, for them of what do I do? I don't want to fight, blah, 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 that sort of thing. Now, a lot of them do want to fight, but so a lot of them are not trained, but it's very different than 2014. If Russia had just decided we're going to push in 2014, they could have done much better than they're doing now, because now the military is much better trained, is much larger. So, I thought someone raised their hand in the back first. Okay. Yeah.
So there's 40 million Ukrainians in Ukraine. Are there like 10 or 12? I mean, how many million men are in arms right now in Ukraine?
That's a good question. I can't tell you the exact numbers. I know the Russian army is in the range of 1 million, is about how many fighting men they have. I think Ukraine is 200,000 or a bit less, is what I've heard.
Let me ask you, just in terms, what your view is in terms of our abilities to support what you're doing financially, of course, prayerfully.
Yeah.
What do you suggest is the best way to get resources and funding to not only your ministry, but anything else there that you would think would be worthy? Is it just through MTW or?
There are dozens of things you could give to. So part of it, I would say, is what are your convictions and passions? So there's a guy from our church. He's a small business owner, not so small anymore, but a business owner. And one of his goals was to buy 5 Jeeps to send to the front that could help evacuate injured personnel, and whether that be military or just people, and bring supplies and that sort of thing. Just that sort of thing was needed. So he set up a fund and they're trying to purchase that. I think he's still doing that. I can look into that. MTW, so I think that if you're supporting MTW and if you're supporting the work of the church, let's put it this way. I think the future of Ukraine depends on the Ukrainian army. And so I do think that the Ukrainian army needs to win in order for there to be a future for a free church in Ukraine. That's kind of how I see it. So I don't necessarily differentiate between military spending or humanitarian aid. But I will say that people have given a lot to MTW, and that's really wonderful, because while we're not using it all right now, there will be a long rebuilding process. And the more that we have in that fund, the more opportunities there are to rebuild churches, quite literally, physically, and to provide opportunities like there's going to be a plethora of trauma counseling that's going to need to happen, trauma counseling centers, things like that. People like Vasil and Vika, who will eventually want to plant a church in a new area to fund things like that. So to give to the Ukraine Crisis Fund will be a very general MTW that will go towards all these things, as well as right now, for example, one of our churches is in occupied territory, Kherson, and those people have almost no way of withdrawing money. And so, but because of our connections, having been there for 20 plus years, those church members know other people who know ways to go to this pharmacy, and you can get money from that pharmacy if you know that person and have the right intel. And so we're sending money to our pastors and people there so that they can draw money from this pharmacy and then get food to the people who are in occupied territory. So things like that are happening with our Ukraine Crisis Fund as well. More specifically, there's this Crates for Ukraine, which some of you may have heard of, and it's a big project that we've kind of just launched. And Brian Winterstein is going over with a few others, I think, in a week. And I think they're taking, goodness knows how many. Do you know, Leslie, how many crates they're taking? Yeah.
CMA is involved with that.
Okay.
Medical supplies and other things. And initially it was going to be 9, and I just heard from Brian this week at GA that they've increased the number to something like 26.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was close to 30. So it's just those, you can get them from Walmart, those plastic crates. We've tried to streamline the system as much as possible. And so it's basically, you can buy supplies from a set list. There's 3 lists, either basic wound care, basic medical supplies, or just basic needs like hygiene and that sort of thing. And so you fill a crate with needs from that, with stuff from that list. It's a communal effort. Usually it's a few Sunday school classes or a church or a presbytery, something like that, band together. You get the list, you buy the stuff, fill the crates, and then you choose a courier to bring it to Krakow. And the reason we do that is because if you ship it, it gets caught up in customs and we don't see it for weeks, months, maybe. But if you bring it on a courier, it's immediately available. The next day or 2 days later, we bring it into Ukraine and it's sent out. So our goal is to get 200 registrations of these kind of crates, people bringing crates, and then we bring them into Ukraine. We just found just across from our church building in Lviv, a warehouse. And so we've got a place to store it all as we then arrange for where it will go. And then it'll all be going to the front, almost all. Some of it will probably stay in Lviv and help the refugees who have come from the east, but then we'll send it forward into Eastern Ukraine. So for very tangible, if somebody, really is passionate and that sounds like something you want to do, band some people together, band some Sunday school classes together and organize that. So that's a specific, like right now, project you can help with. We'll be doing that through August.
Is that what Bradley Cordell's?
Yes. Yeah. So Bradley's, one of the 35 things Bradley's doing is this. Yes. Yeah. One.
Eric, what's the near term for the Norris family? What's your plan? And how is your family's funding? Are there resources available to take care of you while you're in different places?
Yeah. Thank you. I'll answer the last question first. People are the believers in the West have responded very generously and kindly to this. That's been impressive and beautiful to see. Our support account has never been healthier than it is right now because people said, we want to support you in this moment. So praise God, our account as well. People have given to us personally as well, just to make sure we're cared for. Obviously, as we serve into the future, there's, funding is always helpful and needed, but we're well cared for right now. Our plan, the question, what now, right? So our plan is to go, before we came to the States, which was about 2.5 weeks ago, we actually went as a family back into Lviv for a week and a half, sort of a trial period of sorts. Our whole Lviv MTW team is in Lviv right now, so they're back in country. As I said, things seem to be very focused on the east, so Western Ukraine is relatively very safe. And so our plan is to go back at the end of July, to go back into Ukraine. We do not want to go back to Poland. We have zero desire to live in that neither here nor there kind of situation anymore. So our plan is obviously monitoring constantly. Are things as they were? Are they getting better? Where are we? Is to go back into Lviv and at the end of July, and then long term, I don't know for sure, to be completely honest, but we want to be in Lviv to help them through this, at least this next little step of their existence as a church. And then, I think we need to ask questions of, are we still useful? Is this the best place for our family? How is the church? Where is the church? All of those questions. But for now, let's go back to Ukraine at the end of July. Yeah, Linda.
What about the mission teams for Odessa and Kyiv?
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah. The harder question is, what's Team Russia's plan? Because they are not allowed to go back in. But the Kyiv team is scattered currently. There's only a few missionaries on that team, and they're scattered in various places. I don't know their plan. Odessa is a little more coherent, cohesive. They're a lot closer to what's going on. And so they, before the war started, had already evacuated to Romania. And so they've set up, Lord knows what they've set up. Bob's always got some plans. So they've got shelters and all sorts of things. I do know they have gone back into Odessa on quick strikes, not to live and stay there, but to check on people, provide supplies, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what their long-term plan is. But I mean, to be honest, if you're that close to the front, you can't have a long-term plan yet. You're kind of just watching and waiting. Yeah.
One quick question. Just a snapshot of the church in Ukraine before the invasion.
I'll specifically respond to like the Presbyterian church. I don't know, broader, the kind of the Baptist church and its history and charismatic, I don't know as much, but I know about the Presbyterian Reformed Church. So we have 15 churches in the country. Most of them are actually in Central and Eastern Ukraine, in Russian-speaking Ukraine. We're the only church in Western Ukrainian-speaking Ukraine. Yeah, I would say overall, it is, if you know those kind of small, faithful, passionate, but not with the kind of influence like Briarwood churches, like that's our church in Ukraine. That's the churches of Ukraine. They're all very small, and we're the only church that's pastored by a non-Ukrainian, which is encouraging. It's Ukrainian led, and yeah, probably our church has the biggest vision, I would say, of planting more churches throughout Western Ukraine. So
broadly, would you consider Ukraine a Christian nation?
I'm not sure I would consider any nation a Christian nation. But let's put it this way. Almost every Ukrainian identified, if they had a box to check, would check Christian, because they're not Muslim. So they're Christian. This is kind of what they would think, but that doesn't mean they go to the church. And most of them are Orthodox or Catholic. And so most of them are also nominal. Not all of them, but most of them. And so the evangelical population is closer to 3% of the population. America's somewhere in the 25% range, I think, if I'm right. So about 3%. Which the Baptist church survived the Soviet Union. They went underground, and so they have a long history of oppression and all the ways that affected them. But Ukraine was always kind of considered the Bible Belt of the former Soviet Union. It's always been more spiritually open and religious than other parts of Eastern Europe, which isn't necessarily saying much, but comparatively, they always have been.